Right now, underneath the Pacific Ocean floor, there are creatures, thousands of them, living, feeding, thriving, and not one of them has ever seen sunlight. Not once. Not even for a second. And here's what's going to reshape everything you thought you knew about life on Earth. 3 billion years ago, that was the entire planet. Wait, actually, before we dive in, I need to say something up front. This is technically not a space topic. There are no rockets in the first half of this documentary. No nebulae, no black holes. But I'd argue, and I'd argue hard, that this might be the most space-relevant thing we've ever covered on this channel. Because what happened on early Earth, in total darkness, at temperatures that would cook you alive, completely changes where we should be looking for life in the universe. So stay with me. The space part is coming. And when it does, it's going to hit differently because of everything we build before it. Here's what we're going to do together. We're going to step into an ecosystem that predates every tree, every fish, every dinosaur, every blade of grass, an ecosystem that fed the entire planet without a single ray of sunlight. We're going to meet the ancestor of every living thing, including you. We're going to watch the moment a tiny microorganism nearly ended all life on Earth just by breathing. And then, we're going to look at spacecraft that are right now, as you watch this, moving toward moons where that same ancient chemistry might still be running. Alive. Today. Let's go. Imagine you're standing on the surface of Earth. 3.8 billion years ago. And I mean really try to picture this, not the Earth from a nature documentary, not a lush green forest, not even a rocky desert. What you're looking at is something so fundamentally different from anything alive today that our brains genuinely struggle to process it. The sky above you is not blue. It's a murky, hazy amber-orange, almost salmon-colored, because the atmosphere is thick with methane, a greenhouse gas being pumped out by microbial life below. There's essentially no oxygen. We're talking about oxygen levels at roughly 0.0001% of what they are today, a trace so small it's functionally zero. Any animal alive today, any mammal, any fish, any insect, placed on that surface would die within seconds. Not from the cold, not from impact. Simply from the air itself. Look out at the ocean and it's the wrong color. It's blue-green going on teal, almost jade, because it's loaded with dissolved iron. The water chemistry is completely alien. Sulfur compounds, methane, ammonia, things that smell like rotten eggs and industrial accidents, are dissolved throughout. The ocean is not clear. The ocean is basically soup. And the land, if you can call it that, is just bare rock. Basalt. Volcanic plains. Nothing grows on it. There's no soil in any meaningful sense, because soil requires decomposing organic matter, which requires dead organisms, which requires complex organisms, which don't exist yet. It's just mineral surface. Sterile stone under a poisonous sky next to a metal-laced ocean. This is not a hostile environment for life in the dramatic, Hollywood sense. It's not even hostile, really. It's simply alien. So completely unlike what we consider normal, that every assumption you carry from school, every lesson that started with plants use sunlight to make food, and everything eats plants, every single one of those assumptions falls apart before you've been standing here for 10 seconds. Here's something I keep coming back to whenever I think about this period. We teach kids, we teach everyone, that the sun is the source of all energy on Earth. It's in every textbook from kindergarten to university. And it's not wrong, exactly. But it's incomplete in a way that matters enormously. Because for nearly 1 billion years of Earth history, possibly longer, sunlight reaching the surface had essentially nothing to do with how life worked. Nothing. The sun rose and set over a sterile rock surface while the actual business of life was happening somewhere else entirely. If NASA's Mars rovers landed on early Earth, they would scan the surface, find no photosynthetic pigments, no organic compounds in accessible form, no atmospheric oxygen signature, no green. They would send back their data and the report would read, no signs of life. They would be wrong. Spectacularly, completely wrong. Because life wasn't on the surface. It was hidden. It was deep. And it was running on something that had nothing to do with stars. This period, from roughly 3.8 billion years ago to around 2.7 billion years ago, is over 1 billion years of Earth history. Let me give you a sense of scale. The entire history of complex animal life on this planet, everything from the first fish to you sitting there right now, spans roughly 600 million years. This dark period before photosynthesis dominated is nearly twice that long. It's not a footnote. It was the main chapter. We just don't talk about it because nothing that happened during it left behind fossils we can easily point to. The evidence is in the chemistry. In the rocks. In you. So if there's no sunlight reaching anything useful, no oxygen, no green, what on earth was eating what? The answer lives inside a crack in the ocean floor. And what's happening there right now, right this second as you're watching this, is the closest thing we have to a time machine back to the very beginning of life. July 1977. The deep-sea research submersible Alvin, operated by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, descends into the Galapagos Rift, a spreading zone of the ocean floor about 2,500 meters below the surface off the coast of the Galapagos Islands. The scientists aboard expect what everyone expected from the deep ocean at the time: cold, dark, empty. Maybe some sparse bacterial films on the rocks. The deep ocean was considered essentially a biological desert, too cold, too dark, too far from photosynthesis-derived food falling from above. What they saw through the viewport fundamentally shattered that assumption. Tube worms. Dozens of them, white and red, clustered around fissures in the rock, each one as thick as a forearm. Crabs picking their way across the seafloor. Clams, enormous clams, clustered in groups. Shrimp. Fish. An entire community of organisms thriving in total darkness at crushing pressure and near freezing temperature, clustered around columns of superheated water venting from the ocean floor. The team reportedly broke out a bottle of vodka they'd brought along for a significant discovery. Which, fair, honestly. Because what they had found wasn't just a new species or a new ecosystem. They had found proof that life didn't need the sun. And none of them had a textbook that explained what they were looking at. Here's how hydrothermal vents actually work, because the chemistry is important for everything else we're going to talk about. Cold seawater, around 2 degrees Celsius, percolates down through cracks and fissures in the ocean floor. It moves through the rock for kilometers, getting closer and closer to the magma layer below. By the time it's been heated and pressurized by that proximity to molten rock, it's at temperatures between 300 degrees Celsius and 400 degrees Celsius, but it doesn't boil because the pressure at that depth is so extreme that the boiling point of water is far higher than 100 degrees Celsius. This superheated water dissolves minerals and compounds from the rock as it goes: hydrogen sulfide, methane, hydrogen gas itself, and dissolved metals like iron and manganese. When this mineral-rich, superheated water hits the cold ocean, it creates what look like chimneys, towering structures of precipitated minerals, some reaching 60 meters in height. The black smokers are named for the dark plumes they emit, which look like industrial chimney smoke but are actually clouds of metal sulfide particles precipitating out of the water as it rapidly cools. The white smokers, including a remarkable field called Lost City, discovered in 2000 on the mid-Atlantic ridge, are a different chemistry, cooler, more alkaline, and according to many researchers, possibly a better candidate for the true origin point of life. Now, what eats what down here? Because this is the key. The base of this entire food web is not a plant. It's not a photosynthesizing organism of any kind. It's a bacterium or archaean, a single-celled microorganism, that performs something called chemosynthesis. Instead of using light energy to convert CO2 into sugars, these organisms use the energy released by chemical reactions, specifically, the oxidation of hydrogen sulfide, to do the same thing. Carbon dioxide comes in. Hydrogen sulfide comes in. Out comes glucose. Out comes sulfur or sulfate as a byproduct. No photons required. The energy source is pure geochemistry, the heat and chemistry of the planet itself. This is the engine that powered life on Earth for nearly 1 billion years before the first photosynthetic organism existed. Not the sun. The rock. The heat. The chemistry. The planet eating itself, in a sense, and releasing energy that life learned to capture. The mid-ocean ridge system, the longest mountain range on Earth at around 65,000 kilometers, entirely underwater, is laced with active vent systems right now. Estimates suggest there may be hundreds of undiscovered vent fields along its length. Each one is a small, independent power plant, running on geothermal energy, hosting communities of life that have never needed, never evolved for, and never depended on sunlight. But this raises the next question, the one that reshapes the whole story. If these vent communities exist today, what did the very first living things look like? Before tube worms, before crabs, before anything with more than one cell, what was actually down there, at the very beginning? Because the answer involves something so strange, so ancient, that scientists spent decades arguing about whether it was even alive at all. Everything alive on Earth today, every bacterium, every fungus, every plant, every animal, shares a common ancestor. Not a metaphorical common ancestor in some vague evolutionary sense. An actual, specific, physical ancestor. A community of organisms from which every single living lineage on this planet descended. Scientists call this LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. LUCA is not a guess. LUCA is a reconstruction. In 2016, a team led by William Martin at Heinrich Heine University in Dusseldorf did something extraordinary. They analyzed 6.1 million genes from thousands of species of bacteria and archaea, the two most ancient domains of life, and looked for protein families that appeared in every single lineage. The logic: if something appears in every living thing on Earth, it was probably present in whatever those things descended from. They found 355 protein families that qualify. And what those 355 protein families tell you about LUCA is remarkable. LUCA had no oxygen-based metabolism. It lived in an environment where oxygen was toxic, which means it predates the Great Oxidation Event, which we'll get to. It had proteins for processing hydrogen gas. It had enzymes for using CO2 as a carbon source. It lived at very high temperatures, somewhere between 80 degrees Celsius and 120 degrees Celsius, based on the thermal stability of its proteins. It had systems for managing iron and nickel, metals found in abundance at hydrothermal vents. Everything about LUCA points directly at a hydrothermal vent environment, specifically the alkaline white smoker type, as its home. LUCA's diet, if we can call it that, was hydrogen gas reacting with carbon dioxide. The specific biochemical pathway it used is called the Woodall-Jundal pathway, and it is the most ancient metabolic process we know of. It essentially takes H2 and CO2 and combines them to produce acetate and energy. It's elegant, it's simple, and it runs entirely on the chemistry of the vent environment. Here's the thing that genuinely stops me when I think about it. The Woodall-Jundal pathway that Luca used to feed itself 3.8 billion years ago. Archaea in your gut use a version of it right now. Organisms called Methanobrevibacter smithii live in your large intestine, in an oxygen-free environment, consuming hydrogen produced during your digestion and outputting methane. They are doing something functionally similar to what Luca was doing at a hydrothermal vent on a young, dark planet. They are in you. Right now. Carrying the oldest metabolic trick on Earth. There's one more aspect of Luca that I want to spend some time on because it reframes what we mean by ancestor in a very deep way. At the time of Luca, the process called horizontal gene transfer was happening at enormous rates. This is the ability of microorganisms to share genetic material not just with their offspring but directly with other organisms, essentially passing DNA sideways through the population rather than only downward through generations. What this means is that Luca may not have been a single individual, or even a single species. It may have been something more like a gene pool, a community of organisms so interconnected through constant gene sharing that they effectively formed one collective genetic identity. Evolution at the Luca stage was less like a family tree and more like a network, or perhaps a distributed system constantly updating itself. We've never had a word for this in ordinary language because nothing like it exists in our macroscopic world. The closest analogy might be the internet, a network of nodes constantly sharing and updating information with no single node being the source. Luca was something like that. And every living thing on Earth is its descendant. So why, for nearly 1 billion years after Luca, did nothing evolve photosynthesis? Why did this hydrogen-eating, vent-dwelling, darkness-adapted life form not immediately figure out how to use the enormous energy source shining overhead? The answer might be the most counterintuitive thing in this entire documentary. Let's talk about scale. Because so far we've been thinking about hydrothermal vents as isolated oases, small hot spots on the ocean floor where life clusters around chemical energy. But the picture is much, much larger than that. In 2018 and 2019, the Deep Carbon Observatory, a decade-long international research program involving over 1,000 scientists, released a series of findings about what lives inside the Earth. Not on the ocean floor. Inside it. In the rock. In sediments miles beneath the surface. The numbers in their reports require reading slowly. The total biomass of living organisms inside Earth's subsurface, bacteria, archaea, fungi living in rock and sediment, is estimated at 70 billion tons of carbon. To have any sense of what that number means, the total carbon mass of every human being alive on Earth today is roughly 0.06 billion tons. The subsurface biosphere outweighs humanity by a factor of more than 1,000. It outweighs all surface plants and animals combined. It is, by mass, the dominant biosphere on this planet, and it operates entirely independently of sunlight. I have to be honest here. When I first read the Deep Carbon Observatory paper, I had to reread the abstract 3 times because I thought I'd misread a decimal point. I hadn't. 70 billion tons. Living. Underground. Right now. It's the kind of number that should genuinely change how you think about what this planet is. How deep does life go? The answer keeps expanding every time we look. Living microorganisms have been recovered from sediment cores taken 5 kilometers below the ocean floor, a depth where the pressure is equivalent to standing under 50 kilometers of solid rock. They've been found 3 kilometers inside continental rock. The total habitable volume within Earth's crust, the space where liquid water exists in rock pores and fractures, and where some form of energy is available, is estimated at roughly 2.3 billion cubic kilometers. That's nearly double the volume of all the world's oceans. What are these organisms doing? They're not doing much, in the conventional sense. Some of them have cell division rates so slow that a single generation takes 10,000 years. They're not growing, not reproducing in any meaningful timeline, they're just persisting. They extract hydrogen from the slow chemical reaction of water with iron-bearing rock, a process called radiolysis or serpentinization. Some of them may have been in continuous existence, the same community, for tens of millions of years. They are life in the most minimal possible sense, maintaining their chemistry, maintaining their membranes, not dying. And that's enough. There's another layer to this that connects to the very origin story. Before the sulfur-based vent chemistry became dominant, there may have been even earlier communities running on iron reduction, microorganisms that date dissolved iron ions from rock, reducing ferric iron to ferrous iron and releasing energy in the process. The evidence for this is indirect but compelling. The banded iron formations found in some of the oldest sedimentary rock on Earth, including formations in Western Australia and Canada dated to over 3.5 billion years ago, are thought to represent the mineral output of vast iron-cycling microbial communities. Essentially, ancient geological features we can still walk on today may be the accumulated metabolic waste of life forms that predated photosynthesis by billions of years. Iron rust, at planetary scale, left behind by organisms that never saw the sun. The parallel to other worlds, to places in our solar system we're about to talk about in detail, is impossible to ignore. If a biosphere of this scale and this diversity can run indefinitely, in total darkness, inside rock, without any connection to sunlight, then the question of where life might exist elsewhere completely transforms. We're not looking for another Earth with a nice blue sky and a temperate climate. We're looking for water. We're looking for chemistry. That's it. And those two things exist in staggering abundance throughout the solar system. But first, something had to break the dark equilibrium. Something had to change the game. And when it did, it was not a gentle transition. Around 2.7 billion years ago, something evolved that would turn out to be the most consequential biological innovation in the history of this planet. A group of microorganisms, what we now call cyanobacteria, figured out a new trick. Instead of using hydrogen sulfide as their electron donor for chemosynthesis, they used water. H2O. The most abundant liquid on the planet's surface. This might sound like a minor biochemical adjustment. The implications were catastrophic. When you use water as your electron donor in photosynthesis, the byproduct you release is molecular oxygen, O2. For organisms that had evolved over billions of years in an oxygen-free world, molecular oxygen is not a fresh breeze. It's a poison. It reacts aggressively with proteins, with lipids, with DNA, essentially corroding the machinery of life. For the anaerobic organisms that dominated early Earth, oxygen was what carbon monoxide is to us, colorless, odorless, and lethal. At first, the oxygen released by cyanobacteria didn't accumulate in the atmosphere. For hundreds of millions of years, a span of time we should pause to appreciate, the oxygen was captured. Iron dissolved in the oceans reacted with it, precipitating out as iron oxide, rust. At a planetary scale, the banded iron formations we mentioned earlier, those ancient geological layers of iron oxide alternating with other sediment, are the record of this process. The ocean was essentially acting as a chemical sponge, absorbing oxygen before it could reach the atmosphere. But oceans are finite. Around 2.4 billion years ago, the iron supply that had been absorbing the oxygen was exhausted. The sponge was full, and oxygen began accumulating in the atmosphere. This event, the Great Oxidation Event, is sometimes presented in textbooks as a transition toward the atmosphere we know today. What the textbooks often understate is that it was also the largest mass extinction in the history of life on Earth. For the anaerobes that had dominated the planet for over 1 billion years, the rising oxygen concentration was an existential catastrophe. Oxygen concentrations rose from essentially 0 to perhaps 1%, 2%, eventually reaching levels that were directly toxic to nearly every organism alive at the time. The oxygen catastrophe, as it's sometimes called by scientists who want to be more honest about what happened, wiped out or drove into hiding most of the life that existed on Earth. The survivors were pushed into refuges, deep sediments, deep ocean, hydrothermal vents, the guts of other organisms, any environment where oxygen couldn't penetrate. There's a further cascade that makes this even more dramatic. One of the things that had been keeping Earth relatively warm was atmospheric methane, produced in enormous quantities by methanogenic archaea. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. When oxygen rose and began reacting with methane in the atmosphere, it converted it to CO2, a weaker greenhouse gas. The thermal blanket of the early atmosphere was stripped away. Earth's temperature plummeted. The result was the Huronian glaciation, probably the longest and most severe ice age in Earth's history, lasting from roughly 2.4 to 2.1 billion years ago. Based on geological evidence, ice reached equatorial latitudes. Average global temperatures may have dropped to around -50 degrees Celsius. It was, in effect, a snowball Earth event triggered directly by biological activity, by photosynthesis, by life doing what life does, changing the world around it, in ways that were good for the organism doing the changing and catastrophic for nearly everything else. I have to be honest, when I read about the oxygen catastrophe, my first instinct was to draw the obvious parallel to what we're doing right now with CO2. And then I caught myself going down that rabbit hole and consciously pulled back. That's a different video. Maybe an important one. But not this one. The wild irony that I can't let go of, though, the oxygen you're breathing right now, the molecule your body requires to function at every moment, was originally a toxic waste product that almost ended all life on Earth. We evolved to depend on something that was, for the vast majority of Earth's history, a catastrophic pollutant. Evolution is not a story of progress towards something better. It's a story of adaptation to whatever was happening to be true at a given moment. The dark world was shattered. The photosynthetic revolution had won. But here's what almost nobody talks about. The old world didn't disappear. It went underground. It went into the deep ocean. It tucked into every oxygen-free niche it could find. And it's been there ever since, running in parallel, a hidden, ancient biosphere coexisting with everything that came after it. And some of the creatures that survived, they didn't just survive. They changed everything about how complex life, including us, would eventually work. In 1967, a 26-year-old graduate student named Lynn Margulis submitted a paper proposing something so strange that 15 scientific journals rejected it before it was finally published. The idea, which we now call endosymbiosis theory, was this: the mitochondria inside your cells are not part of your cells. They are ancient bacteria that were engulfed by a larger cell billions of years ago, and instead of being digested, they formed a partnership. They stayed. They became permanent residents. And every complex living thing on Earth is the product of that merger. At the time, this was considered almost professionally reckless. Cells had parts, and mitochondria were one of those parts, and the idea that those parts were once independent organisms seemed more like science fiction than biology. The evidence that vindicated her is now overwhelming. Mitochondria have their own DNA, circular, bacterial-style DNA, completely separate from the nuclear DNA in your chromosomes. They replicate independently of the cell around them, on their own schedule. They have their own ribosomes, different enough from the ribosomes in the rest of the cell that they're more similar to bacterial ribosomes. And here's the one that should stop you cold: mitochondria are killed by antibiotics. Drugs designed specifically to target and destroy bacteria. Because, in terms of their fundamental molecular architecture, they still are bacteria. The 2 billion years they've spent inside eukaryotic cells has not changed what they are at the deepest level. In 2015, researchers sampling sediment cores from 2,352 meters below the Arctic Ocean found an archaea they named Lokiarchaeota. Genome analysis revealed it as the closest known relative to the ancestor of all eukaryotes, all complex cells, all organisms with a nucleus. It lived in cold, dark, anoxic deep-sea sediment. No light. No oxygen. Just chemistry, and rock, and the slow patience of the ancient world. What this tells us is something almost too elegant to be accidental. The eukaryotic cell, the cell type that all animals, all plants, all fungi are built from, was not created from scratch. It was assembled from components that already existed. An archaean, from the dark world, provided the chassis. A bacterium, also from the dark world, provided the engine, the mitochondria. And when cyanobacteria were later incorporated into the cells of early algae, they became chloroplasts, the organelles that perform photosynthesis in plants today. Plants didn't invent photosynthesis. They acquired it through endosymbiosis. From the same cyanobacteria that had caused the oxygen catastrophe. The dark world didn't lose the war against oxygen. It merged with the victors. It became the foundation of every complex living thing that followed. The mitochondria in your heart cells, your brain cells, the cells of your eyes reading this right now, they are ancient beings from a world without sunlight. Not in a poetic sense. Not as metaphor. That's the actual molecular history. Every breath you take feeds oxygen into mitochondria that drive a reaction called the electron transport chain, a process that generates ADP, the energy currency of your cells. That process is the direct biochemical descendant of ancient bacterial chemistry that predates the existence of animals by over 2 billion years. You are, in a precise and literal sense, a community of ancient organisms that figured out how to cooperate. The dark world built you. Now, if that kind of cooperation, that kind of resilience, that kind of chemistry produced life here, where else might it be happening? And are we looking in the right places? For most of the history of astrobiology, the search for life beyond Earth was organized around a concept called the habitable zone, the range of distances from a star where liquid water could exist on a planet's surface. The logic was clean: life needs liquid water needs the right temperature requires the right amount of sunlight. So you look for planets at the right distance from their star. You look for another Earth. That logic, that entire framework, changes fundamentally when you understand the dark biosphere. If life doesn't need sunlight, if it can run for billions of years on pure geochemistry, if the only prerequisites are liquid water and chemical gradients, then habitable zone is not a ring around a star. It's any place in the universe with liquid water and chemistry. And that opens up something enormous. In our own solar system, the most immediately exciting candidates are not other planets. They're moons. Specifically, Europa, orbiting Jupiter, and Enceladus, orbiting Saturn. Europa is covered by a shell of ice 10 to 30 kilometers thick. Below that ice is a global ocean of liquid water estimated to be roughly 100 kilometers deep, 10 times the depth of Earth's deepest ocean. The ice layer insulates the ocean from the cold of space. Tidal forces from Jupiter's immense gravity flex and heat Europa's interior, potentially maintaining hydrothermal activity on the ocean floor. There is no sunlight in that ocean. There is no connection to the surface. There is only rock, water, chemistry, and heat, the exact conditions that, on Earth, produced Luca. NASA's Europa Clipper mission launched in October 2024 and is currently traveling toward the Jupiter system. Its instruments include a magnetometer to probe the ocean depth and salinity, an ultraviolet spectrometer to analyze any material ejected into space, and a suite of cameras and thermal sensors. It cannot land and cannot sample the ocean directly, but it can look for the signatures of an active hydrothermal system beneath the ice, and if it finds them, it will be the strongest evidence yet that we are not alone. Enceladus, though, is the one that makes my hands shake a little when I talk about it. Because Enceladus is not hypothetical. Enceladus has already revealed its ocean to us. In 2005, the Cassini spacecraft discovered geysers erupting from the south pole of Enceladus, jets of water vapor and ice particles shooting hundreds of kilometers into space, escaping through cracks in the moon's icy surface. Cassini was able to fly directly through these plumes. What it found was not just water. In 2017, analyzing plume data collected over years, scientists reported the detection of molecular hydrogen, H2, in concentrations that could only be explained by one process: hot water reacting with rock. Serpentinization. The same reaction that produces the hydrogen that Luca ate. The same chemistry at the base of the dark biosphere. They also found silica nanoparticles in the plumes, which form only when liquid water at around 90 degrees Celsius or higher interacts with rock over extended periods. There are hydrothermal vents on Enceladus. Active ones. Right now. Producing hydrogen. Surrounded by liquid water. At a moon that receives almost no solar energy. If you find life on Enceladus, even a single microbe, even a dead cellular structure preserved in the ice, it changes what it means to be alive on this planet. It means life didn't happen once, on one lucky world, through some cosmic accident. It means life is what the universe does when the conditions are even marginally right. It means every ocean moon, every liquid water body buried under ice anywhere in the cosmos, is a potential biosphere. The number of potentially inhabited worlds in the Milky Way alone shifts from maybe hundreds to potentially hundreds of billions. We might be within a generation of that discovery. The spacecraft exists. It's flying. I'm going to be honest, I don't know how to talk about that without feeling genuinely moved. Not the performed kind of moved. The kind where you stop for a second and just sit with what it would mean. If we find life on Enceladus, it changes what it means to be human. We built the spacecraft. We're going. That's real. But before we leave the solar system completely, there's something we've been leaving out this entire time. Something that survived from the dark world and is still here, visible, touchable, living. And you've probably interacted with it without knowing. Off the coast of Western Australia, in a shallow, hypersaline bay called Shark Bay, there are structures on the seafloor that look like lumpy gray rocks. They're called stromatolites, and they are the oldest continuously living communities on Earth. The fossil record of stromatolites extends back 3.5 billion years, from a time before photosynthesis changed the atmosphere, before the Great Oxidation Event, before anything with more than one cell existed. And they are still growing. Slowly, a few millimeters per year, but growing. The cyanobacteria that build them are the direct descendants of the organisms that caused the oxygen catastrophe, still doing what their ancestors did, in essentially the same way. Walking past a stromatolite at Shark Bay, which you can do, there are boardwalks, is the closest most humans will ever come to looking directly at the ancient world. Not a fossil. Not a reconstruction. The living thing. In your own body, the connection to that world is more intimate. Roughly 20% of the microorganisms in the human gut are archaea, the domain of life most closely related to leuca, more ancient than bacteria in many respects. Methanobrevibacter smithii lives in your large intestine. It's strictly anaerobic, oxygen kills it. It consumes hydrogen produced by bacterial fermentation of your food and converts it to methane, using a metabolic pathway directly inherited from the world before photosynthesis. It is, in every meaningful sense, an organism from the dark age of Earth, living inside a modern human, performing ancient chemistry to keep a microbial community in balance. The human microbiome is not just bacteria in your gut. It's a cross-temporal ecosystem spanning 4 billion years of evolutionary history. At the deepest point of the ocean accessible to biological sampling, the Isogasawara Trench at 8,336 meters below sea level, documented in 2023, researchers found snailfish. A vertebrate. A fish with a spine and eyes and fins, living at a depth where the pressure exceeds 800 atmospheres. These fish are supported by a food web ultimately grounded in chemosynthetic bacteria. No sunlight has ever reached where they live. And then there's the technology angle, which I want to spend a moment on because it reframes the practical value of all of this. In the 1960s, a microbiologist named Thomas Brock was studying the hot springs of Yellowstone National Park. He discovered bacteria, Thermus aquaticus, living comfortably in water at 70 degrees Celsius to 80 degrees Celsius. Everyone assumed extremophiles like this were scientific curiosities. Organisms from an alien corner of life's diversity with no practical application. Those organisms contained an enzyme called Taq polymerase. That enzyme became the core of PCR, polymerase chain reaction, the technique that allows scientists to amplify tiny fragments of DNA. PCR is the foundation of forensic DNA analysis, paternity testing, cancer diagnostics. And it was the specific technology used in COVID-19 testing that allowed the world to identify, track, and respond to a pandemic. The enzyme that made all of that possible came from a bacterium descended from the dark world, adapted to conditions that would have been normal on early Earth. There's something almost comforting in this. The ancient world didn't end. It stepped aside, made room for the complexity that came after, and continued doing what it has always done. Patient, ancient, quietly running the deep machinery of the planet. Let me try to pull the larger picture together, because I think there are some things worth sitting with that go beyond the facts. The first thing is about assumptions. For 150 years, from roughly Darwin to the 1977 discovery of hydrothermal vents, science assumed, no sunlight equals no life. It was a reasonable assumption. It followed from everything that had been observed. And it was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Completely wrong in a way that required rebuilding fundamental models of what life is and where it can exist. The lesson is not that scientists were stupid. The lesson is that our assumptions about what's possible track our experience, and our experience is always incomplete. There's something intellectually bracing about that. What is our version of life needs sunlight today? What fundamental assumption are we currently making, based on everything we've observed, that will look as obviously wrong in 50 years as the deep ocean is a biological desert looks to us now? The second thing, resilience. Su Song, life, has survived the Great Oxidation Event, Snowball Earth, the Late Heavy Bombardment, 5 mass extinctions caused by various combinations of asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, and climate collapses. Each time, the survival mechanism was not toughness in the dramatic sense. It was redundancy and diversity. The dark biosphere was essentially a backup drive for all of life, an oxygen-free refuge where the chemistry of ancient life continued regardless of what was happening on the surface. When oxygen rose and killed most of what lived above, the subsurface kept going. When ice covered the entire planet, the vents kept running. Diversity, the presence of many different solutions to the problem of staying alive, turns out to be the only strategy that reliably works over geological time. The third thing is personal, and I want to be careful with it because I don't want to overreach. Every cell in your body contains mitochondria descended from ancient bacteria that lived in a dark, hot, oxygen-free world billions of years ago. The metabolic reactions happening in those mitochondria right now, generating the energy that lets your neurons fire and your heart beat, are the direct descendants of chemistry that predates the existence of animals by over 2 billion years. We think of ourselves as children of the sun, organisms shaped by and dependent on solar energy flowing through photosynthesis into food. But at the cellular level, at the level of the actual machinery that keeps you alive, we are something different. We are children of the dark, who learned to use a photosynthesizing passenger to access sunlight indirectly. The dark world is not our past. It's our foundation. And practically, the fields of synthetic biology and carbon capture are beginning to explore chemosynthesis as a tool. Bacteria that eat CO2 and produce useful compounds. Microbial systems for detoxifying contaminated sites. Closed-loop biological life support systems for space habitats on the Moon or Mars that don't depend on growing plants under artificial lighting. Every one of these applications draws directly on understanding what life learned to do before the sun was available. I started researching this video thinking it would be about ancient bacteria. I finished it feeling like I'd understood something different about what it means to be alive at all. I don't know if that translates through a screen. But that's what happened. And I think it's worth naming. There's one number I want to leave you with. One image. And then I want to say something that I think is actually the point of all of this. The number, the Late Heavy Bombardment. Between 4.1 and 3.8 billion years ago, the early solar system underwent a period of intense asteroid and comet impacts. The bombardment was severe enough that the surface of the Earth was potentially sterilized multiple times. Temperatures from impacts may have been sufficient to partially vaporize the oceans. The energy released by repeated large impacts could have reset conditions on the surface to something that would seem completely incompatible with life. And yet, the molecular clock evidence, the chemistry of the oldest rocks, suggests that life appeared on Earth during or immediately after this bombardment. Maybe during it. Su Song didn't wait for the violence to stop. It started as soon as the chemistry was even marginally permissive. It started in the vents, in the deep rock, in the places that the impacts couldn't reach. Luca was there, eating hydrogen in the dark, while the surface above was being hammered by rocks falling from space. Life does not wait for optimal conditions. Life begins at the earliest possible moment and adapts to whatever comes next. That's not inspiration, that's just empirically what happened. The image, Cassini's photographs of the plumes of Enceladus. Jets of water erupting from the south pole of a small, icy moon, backlit by the distant sun, spreading into the black of space in a shape that looks like wings, or like smoke from an ancient fire. In those plumes, there are hydrogen molecules. There are organic compounds. There are the building blocks that Luca needed, being ejected into space freely. Every day. From a moon that has never received more than a fraction of a percent of the sunlight that Earth gets. If any of those plume particles ever carried something alive, even dormant, even frozen, the distances between worlds become something different. The barriers we assumed were absolute turn out to be permeable. Lithopanspermia, the transport of microbial life inside ejected rock fragments, has been demonstrated theoretically and experimentally to be physically possible. We know that Martian meteorites have landed on Earth. We know that the reverse is true. We know that bacterial spores can survive the conditions of space for extended periods inside rocky material. The question of whether life on Earth and any hypothetical life on Mars might be related, might be the same life, distributed across planets by impact events, is a genuinely open scientific question. We might not be searching for alien life. We might be searching for cousins. 3.8 billion years ago, in total darkness, at the bottom of an alien ocean, something happened. We don't know exactly what. We don't know exactly how. But whatever it was, it led, in an unbroken chain, to you. Watching this. Right now. That chain has never been broken. Not once. Not through the oxygen catastrophe or snowball Earth or 5 extinction events or a billion years of bacterial darkness. In nearly 4 billion years of continuous, uninterrupted life on this planet, that chain has held. I don't know about you, but I find that almost impossible to hold in my head. Okay. Yeah. Okay. In this documentary, we stepped into a world that existed before the first green thing ever grew on Earth, a world of total darkness, of alien chemistry, of life-eating rock and running on geothermal heat. We found that this world didn't end when photosynthesis arrived. It built us. It lives inside us. And it might be, right now, living inside the oceans of moons we've barely begun to explore. The universe doesn't need sunlight to make life. It just needs chemistry, and liquid water, and time. And there is no shortage of any of those 3 things. If something shifted for you while we were in here, if you're now looking at your mitochondria or a deep ocean vent or a plume photo from Enceladus just slightly differently than you were an hour ago, then we built this journey together, and I want to know that. Next time, we're going to ask a question that sounds almost embarrassingly simple but keeps scientists up at night. What is the actual definition of life? Because it turns out we don't have one. Not really. Not one that holds for everything we've found. And if we can't define it, how would we even know we'd recognize it if we found it on Enceladus? That question, what is life, and would we recognize it, is the one I keep coming back to. Because everything we've covered in the last hour has been pushing quietly toward it. Luca didn't look like what we'd call life if we saw it without context. The communities around hydrothermal vents looked so alien to the researchers who first found them in 1977 that the discovery reshaped the entire field of biology almost overnight. The endosymbiotic event that created the eukaryotic cell, one organism absorbing another and both surviving, doesn't map neatly onto any intuitive definition of what an individual living thing is supposed to be. Are you one organism? Or are you a community of organisms that reached an arrangement so stable it looks like unity from the outside? The dark world keeps asking that question. And the answer keeps refusing to be simple. There's a scientist named Carl Woese, and if that name is familiar to you, it's because we touched on his work when we talked about Luca and the Tree of Life. Woes spent decades being ignored and then being proved right, which is a trajectory that keeps appearing in the history of biology. His work on ribosomal RNA sequencing in the 1970s and 1980s didn't just confirm that archaea were a separate domain of life. It revealed that the tree of life we had been drawing since Darwin was wrong in its proportions. Most of the genetic diversity on Earth, the overwhelming majority of evolutionary distance between organisms, sits in the microbial world. In the bacteria, in the archaea, in the organisms that live in vents and in rock and in conditions we spent most of human history not knowing existed. All the animals, all the plants, all the fungi, all the visible, touchable, nameable things that we built our entire understanding of life around, they're a thin branch at the edge of a tree whose trunk and most of whose limbs are invisible to the naked eye. We built our definition of life from the exceptions, from the outliers, from the recent arrivals. That's the final thing the dark world teaches us. It teaches us that our sample size for understanding life has always been catastrophically small. We drew conclusions from what was in front of us. We taught those conclusions in schools. We built entire philosophical frameworks about the relationship between life and sunlight and photosynthesis and green things growing upward toward the sky. And underneath all of it, for the entire time, 3 billion years of prior art was down there in the dark, running on entirely different principles, completely indifferent to our theories. I am not saying this to be discouraging. I'm saying it because I think it's the most exciting scientific situation imaginable. We are not at the end of understanding life. We are possibly, depending on how you measure it, not even at the beginning. When we go looking for life on other worlds, and we will, in our lifetimes, look seriously, we will be sending instruments designed by humans who grew up on a planet where life is photosynthetic, multicellular, visible, and organized around solar energy. There's a real risk that we build detectors tuned to find what we know and miss entirely what we don't. The history of science is littered with cases where the thing being looked for was present the whole time and invisible because the looker had the wrong frame. Hydrothermal vent ecosystems were present on Earth for billions of years before humans went and found them in 1977. Deep subsurface microbial communities, the rock-eating bacteria living kilometers underground, were largely unknown to science until the 1980s and 1990s. The organisms living in the deepest parts of the ocean were speculated to not exist, because the pressure was assumed to be incompatible with life, until we went down and found them. Every time we've expanded our search, we've found life in places we had already decided were impossible. That pattern is not a coincidence. That pattern is telling us something about our priors. Our priors are wrong. Systematically, repeatedly, in every direction we've looked, our priors about what life requires and where it can exist have turned out to be too narrow. So when we aim a detector at the plumes of Enceladus, or drill into the ice of Europa, or analyze the chemistry of a hydrothermal system on the floor of a European ocean, we should be humble about what we think we're looking for. Life might be there in a form we don't have a category for yet. In a chemistry we haven't modeled. Using an energy source we've overlooked. Or, of course, it might not be there at all. That's also possible. The universe is not obligated to populate every chemically permissive environment with biology. But the prior on that, too, has shifted. The rare Earth hypothesis, the idea that the conditions that produced life on Earth are so unusual that life is probably unique to Earth, has to contend with the fact that the conditions we originally thought were unique keep turning out to be common. Liquid water, organic chemistry, geothermal energy, hydrothermal venting. None of these are rare. We found them or found strong evidence for them in multiple places in our own solar system. And our solar system is not special. There are estimated to be somewhere between 100 billion and 400 billion stars in the Milky Way alone. The number of potentially water-bearing worlds in that space is a number so large it becomes meaningless to say out loud. If life began here under the conditions we've described, in a dark, hot, chemically volatile environment, with nothing but geothermal energy and the right mix of molecules, then the question is not whether those conditions exist elsewhere. They do. The question is whether the chemistry that worked here works universally. Whether the path from chemistry to life is a narrow path requiring extraordinary coincidence, or a broad path that converges from many directions toward the same destination. We don't know. But everything we've learned about early life on Earth pushes, carefully, in the direction of the latter. There's one more thing. And this is the part one kept trying to cut from the script because it felt too large to fit, and I kept putting it back because I couldn't justify leaving it out. The fact that you can watch this video, that I can make it, that we can have this conversation across whatever distance separates us, is itself a product of the dark world. Your neurons fire on ATP produced by mitochondria. Your mitochondria are the descendants of ancient bacteria that first learned to run efficient oxidative chemistry in conditions that no longer exist on the surface of this planet. The endosymbiotic partnership that created the eukaryotic cell, that created you, was not inevitable. It was not planned. It was a contingent event, a chemical accident, a moment where a cell failed to digest something it had engulfed, and instead of dying, built something new out of the failure. Every layer of complexity added since then, every additional symbiosis, every evolutionary innovation, every step from single-celled eukaryote to the thing reading these words right now, was built on top of that first dark world chemistry. We are not just descended from the organisms of the deep. We are running their software. Updated, modified, translated through billions of years of iteration, but at the base of the stack, it's still the same code. The same core metabolic reactions. The same proton gradient across a membrane. The same fundamental trick that Luca learned in the dark. You are a very sophisticated modification of a hydrothermal vent organism. That is not a metaphor. That is, as best as modern biology can determine, a description of what actually happened. I find that staggering. And I realize I've said that a few times in this video. I keep reaching the edge of my ability to hold the scale of what we're talking about and defaulting to the word staggering because I don't have a better one. If you have a better one, genuinely, I want to hear it. Leave it in the comments. I'll be down there reading. We started this journey in total darkness. No sun. No green. No oxygen. Just hot water pushing through cracks in seafloor rock, and somewhere in that chemistry, the first flicker of something that would eventually build everything. We followed that flicker through 4 billion years. We watched it survive catastrophe after catastrophe. We saw it change the entire atmosphere of a planet, nearly destroy itself in the process, recover, diversify, swallow itself to become more complex, and eventually, somehow, produce consciousness capable of looking back at the whole journey and asking, how did this happen? The dark world is not a footnote to the story of life on Earth. It is the story. Everything that came after, the dinosaurs, the forests, the oceans full of fish, the first land animals, the flowers, the birds, the primates, the cities, the telescopes, all of it was built on a foundation laid in darkness, by organisms that will never be famous, in conditions that would kill us in seconds. They didn't know they were building a world. They were just doing chemistry. But here we are. And if life is doing the same thing right now, in the dark water of an icy moon some 628 million kilometers from here, just doing chemistry, not knowing, not caring, running the same ancient reactions in the dark, then the universe is considerably less empty than it looks from the surface of a sunlit planet. That thought is either terrifying or magnificent. Probably both. But it might be the most important thought we have, going forward, as a species that has decided to look outward. So keep looking. Because the dark is not empty. We've known that for almost 50 years now. We just keep forgetting to let it change how we search. And if you want proof that the dark world is still running the show, just wait until the next time the power goes out in your city. Every hospital, every server farm, every life support system immediately switches to backup generators burning chemical energy, independent of the sun. We built civilization on photosynthesis, yes. But when things get critical, when the stakes are highest, we instinctively reach for the older system. The one that doesn't need the light. The one we inherited from the deep. Some instincts run 4 billion years deep. If this video reshapes even a fraction of how you think about where life comes from, and where else it might be waiting for us in the dark, then we went somewhere worth going today. And there's something quietly remarkable about the fact that we found the hydrothermal vents in 1977, not in 1877, not in 2077, but right at the moment in human history when we had just started asking the question of where else life might exist in the universe seriously enough to fund the search. The timing feels almost too convenient. Like the planet waited until we were ready for the answer before showing us the question was wrong to begin with. We had been asking, where is the sunlight? And the ocean floor said, you're asking the wrong thing. Ask instead where the chemistry is. Ask where the energy gradient is. Ask where the water meets the rock and the heat. Those are the conditions. The sunlight was never the point. That realization, that sunlight is a local solution, not a universal requirement, is arguably the most consequential shift in astrobiology since the discovery of extremophiles. It did not make headlines the way a Mars rover landing does. It did not trend. But in the quiet architecture of how scientists now think about the search for life, it changed nearly everything. Every mission planning document for Europa, for Enceladus, for the subsurface of Mars now carries, somewhere in its foundational assumptions, the fingerprint of that 1977 dive into the dark Pacific. Alvin went down. The biologists were stunned. The astrobiologists, decades later, were quietly thrilled. The universe had just gotten a great deal more interesting. We built this entire video on a simple inversion. Take the assumption everyone carries, that life needs the sun, and follow what happens when you remove it. Not as a thought experiment. As actual history. Because that history happened. It is recorded in the rocks, in the chemistry of your cells, in the genomes of microbes living right now in environments that would be described, on any other planet, as uninhabitable. The dark world is not a hypothesis. It is a place. It has coordinates. You can go there, if you have the right submarine and a tolerance for pressure that would reduce you to a liquid otherwise. I keep thinking about the tube worms. Those enormous white columns standing at the vent fields, swaying slightly in the thermal current, running entirely on sulfur chemistry, living decades in a place with no seasons, no days, no cycles tied to any star. They are not struggling to survive in a hostile environment. They are thriving in their native one. The hostility is ours to assign. The tube worm does not experience the deep ocean floor as a place of darkness and death. It experiences it as home. And it has been home for its lineage for so long that the sun is not even a rumor. That reframing, who decides what counts as hostile, is worth carrying with you past this video. When we send probes to Europa and describe the subsurface ocean as a potential environment for life, we are already applying this lesson. We are no longer requiring sunlight as a prerequisite. We learned that in 1977. We are still absorbing the implications. If you made it this far, we went somewhere genuinely strange together, through 4 billion years of darkness, through catastrophe in chemistry and the slow, patient building of a world that would eventually light itself on fire with oxygen and then, somehow, survive the fire. That is the actual story of life on Earth. Not the green version. Not the sunlit version your textbook preferred. The real one. Which starts in the dark, with nothing but heat and water and the stubborn insistence of chemistry on finding a way. So next time someone tells you that life requires the right conditions, gently, calmly, with the confidence of someone who has spent an hour in the Archean deep, tell them that life is the thing that decides what the right conditions are. And if that makes you want to go find the nearest hydrothermal vent and introduce yourself, honestly, same. The tube worms are not great conversationalists, but their chemistry is 4 billion years of uninterrupted argument that the universe bends toward life, and that is a conversation worth having in whatever darkness you happen to find yourself in.